Sawadee Cup. So last session, I hope you're able to pay some attention I promise I won't go over time so we can get on with the party. I'm going to talk about two things today. First thing is talk about threat hunting, and the second thing, talk about how observability helps with threat hunting. You may know Riverbed for WAN optimization, and we used to be orange, but now we've changed our colors. What we've been doing is selling performance for many years. Then we were looking at performance from are you actually getting performance? So WAN optimization helped get network performance, but we needed to see whether network performance was what we needed. And if we solved WAN optimization, we needed to make sure that it was giving network performance. So we've been doing network performance and monitoring for a long time. Now, how does this relate to security? Security and network monitoring are coming together. What we mean by this is often a security issue is seen as a performance issue. So a really good example of that, if I talk about something that happened back in 1988, a thing called Morris worm was written. And what it did was it replicated across the internet at the time, which was only 60,000 devices, but it kept replicating itself and it kept copying itself onto the same systems again and again. And those systems slowed down, so they saw performance issues and then discovered this thing which became known as a worm. It's interesting because if you look at the theme for this conference, it's about zero trust. And I've read many articles that talk about the Morris worm started the movement of zero trust. Because before the Morris worm, we trusted everything. There was no problems. Everything was allowed access. There was no problems. But now we have to start worrying about zero trust. And articles say that started in 1988. So what do we mean by merging? We're merging our tools together. We're merging our people, our workflows, our attitudes. And maybe we need to think about merging our budget as well, because network operations has packet capture, is storing data. Whereas security, we want to do the same thing. So it might make sense to bring those together. If you bring those together, then you can afford more packet capture. You can have more information. You can keep that information for longer. And the reason we need to do that, the reason that things are merging together is that we don't know when a problem occurs, if it's a security issue or maybe it's a misconfiguration issue. Maybe we're having a routing issue or maybe we're having an attack. So this is where threat hunting becomes very important. Now, the other thing I just wanted to call out is this is looking at the MITRE Defend framework from National Security Agency in America, and they talk about network traffic analysis as being a very big part of keeping networks secure. So being able to store network information and analyze that is very important in keeping our customers' networks secure. Okay, I'll talk about threat hunting. What is threat hunting? And what are we looking for with Riverbed when it comes to threat hunting? And if we look at the type of compromises that happen in an environment, from down in the bottom left-hand corner is the easy stuff. This is the stuff that we know what we're looking for. We have signatures. We can find these things on firewalls. So we know what we're looking for. In the middle, it becomes a little bit more difficult. There's some analysis that needs to happen to figure out, is it good? Or is it bad? Is it normal behavior, or is it something's compromised our environment? And the last thing where threat hunting becomes very important is in the top right-hand corner, which is the unknown unknowns. This is the stuff where you've got often people that are very well funded, maybe it's nation-state actors, they've got lots of resources, they've got lots of money, and they want to get into an environment and they want to stay in that environment. So they're not trying to break in and cause some problems straight away. They want to look around. They want to compromise your environment and look around and then figure out what they're going to do. And that's the stuff that threat hunting and network analysis becomes really important. So cyber threat hunting. One of the challenges we have is that just because we haven't found anything wrong doesn't mean there isn't something wrong there. So no evidence of compromise is evidence that there is no compromise. So threat hunting, and you can see there again, is that what we're trying to do is we're looking for advanced persistent threats. And there's studies out there that say that typically they'll go in there and they'll be there for 200 days, over 200 days before you detect them. We need to find these threats quicker and faster. So at Riverbed, we talk a lot about full fidelity threat hunting. We need lots of data. We need to store all of the data. We need to be able to analyze that data. We need to be able to retain that data as evidence. Sometimes we need to move to legal action around these things. So this is what we're talking about with full fidelity threat hunting. Struggling with that myself. Okay, so how do we do threat hunting? We need a whiteboard, we need telemetry or data, and we need a mindset. We need to have people look at things, put hypotheses together. So, put theories out there and see if those theories are right or they're not. And what I mean by theories are, is the CEO's laptop compromised? How do we make sure that it hasn't been compromised? How do we make sure that a web server that hasn't been compromised isn't doing things that it shouldn't be doing? And testing those theories. Now, there's nothing wrong with testing a theory and finding that there's nothing there. That's not wasted time because we've just disproved our theory and we can look for more things. We need the telemetry. We need, at Riverbed, we talk about the packets. We need the flows. We need the logs. We need information from the endpoints, whether it's an end user device or whether it's a server. We need the mindset. As I said, we need to keep testing things. We need to look at things. We need to come up with theories and see if they're right or whether they're not. We need to keep looking at things to make sure. Sometimes that's even looking at what's going out in the industry and looking and seeing attacks that are coming out, things like Log4j, and saying, are we compromised that? We need to start looking at our environment to make sure that that's not happening. And we also need to use our other technologies as well. So it's really important to think that when it comes to threat hunting, and as I talk about observability, that's an ecosystem. So you heard from Gigamon just before, they talk about getting that information, being able to connect to the network and capturing that. So we work with vendors like that. There's lots of, we work with Splunk as well. We don't compete with those because it's an ecosystem and it's using lots of different technologies. We need them to work together as a process. Okay, observability. This is something that we're talking about a lot. And you'll see a lot of vendors talk about observability. And I want to talk a little bit more about what that is and what Riverbed means by observability. Really what it is it's the glue. It's the thing that brings everything together. So if we're getting lots of telemetry, if you look at that picture there, if we're getting telemetry or data from the servers, if we're getting telemetry from the infrastructure, from the routers, from the switches, from the endpoint devices, from the servers, if we're getting all this information, we're getting a lot of information. And observability helps us figure out what's important and what's not important. We need to see everything. If you can't see it, you can't protect it. And observability helps us figure out, through things like artificial intelligence, machine learning, what's important, what isn't. What does it mean? Is it important? Why did it happen? What caused it? And what should I focus on first? Should I focus on this or something that's more important? Sometimes it's hard to figure that out. So observability helps us to do that. And a lot of vendors talk about observability. It's a term that's coming out. So I think it's good to look at what industry analysts like Gartner talk about. So they talk about observability helps a skilled observer understand the behavior of a system, so a customer's network, and with enough instrumentation, be able to figure out what that is. So we like to think that we're extending that definition with what we call Alluvio Unified Observability. So that's the platform that Riverbed has built and is continuing to build around observability. And it's be able to get all of this information, all this telemetry, figure out what's important for the human operator and help them make decisions about what's going on in the environment. So that platform that we've been building out and we'll continue to build up uses our technologies to be able to collect information from the environment. So that's getting information from the user devices. That's getting information from the servers. This is getting information from the network, so the packets, the flows, the transactions, the infrastructure, SNMP. So it's collecting all of that data. And that's something we've been doing for a long time, and we'll continue to do it because that information is important. But what we want to do with that is we want to build on top of that and start using things like artificial intelligence and machine learning to figure out with all of this information that we're collecting, all of this telemetry, all of this data, all of these incidents that have been generated, using algorithms to help us figure out what's important, what do we need to look for. And once we've figured that out, then be able to do something about it. So the scripted investigations part is a very important piece that we're building out. We've been testing this with a lot of our customers over the last 12 months, 18 months. And that's really important for them, because what the scripted investigations are looking at when someone who, you think about those people that are in your own customers' networks, you've probably got technical people in your teams as well, and they know everything about the customer's environment. They're very skilled, they have lots of expertise, but they're rare to find, and they're even rarer to get hold of to help with your customers' problems. So we need to take their expertise and be able to script that into what we call runbooks. And this allows people that maybe don't have as much expertise to leverage their expertise to go solve these problems. And eventually we want to even do remediation. So we want to be able to fix these problems once we know what they are. So that's the platform that we're building out, and we'll be coming out in the next month or so talking about how we're taking all of this telemetry that we collect with our customers' environments and be able to apply this observability over the top. And what we're really trying to do is get those business outcomes that we talk about in terms of revenue, cost, productivity, risk. That's the key things that we're trying to do for our customers. All right, I just want to finish off by giving you some examples of how we use all this information we collect to actually do this threat hunting. And two of the key things we talk about is pivoting and drill down. Pivoting is be able to go and say, okay, now I know this IP address is where the problems are occurring. I need to maybe look at the applications on that IP address. Or maybe I need to look at the users on that IP address. And then I'll start looking at the users. And then maybe I want to go and pivot again and say, okay, now I know that user is the problem. Where else has that user been? It's being able to change the direction we're going with our threat hunting. I'll give you some examples in a sec about that. And the other thing is around the drill down. So once I've identified a problem, I want to go and look in more detail at that. So maybe I've identified the IP address. Now I want all the packets from that IP address because I need to do some really detailed troubleshooting. And so another example of that is that we can use our network traffic we're collecting to map things out. And I'll show you an example of how we can map something like a worm out once we know that it's infected our systems. Okay, so one of those examples. So the system might tell you a bunch of incidents that are happening in the customer's environment. And it'll tell you which are the most important ones. So right now we'll just say, let's look, we can see that there's an exfiltration attack. So we might want to drill down into that exfiltration. So it's just about seeing a high-level summary, then being able to click on it and get the details. So get more detail around this event that's happened that's important to look at. And we can see here is that we can then go, all right, for all of that exfiltration, who's doing that? So we can drill down further and we can see that it's a web server is acting like a client and it's talking to an external IP address. So that's something we might want to go and look in more detail. So we might go and look further into that. And for a right click, we can then start looking at, maybe we want to look at who's that web server 33 been talking to? We might want to go and look at some of the specific things like we have special cyber threat hunting menus that say, well, give me all the events for that. All the suspicious things that IP address has had. Has it been involved in a port scan? Has it been involved in a ping sweep? So reconnaissance. We might want to go into that deep dive packet troubleshooting and analysis piece as well. So maybe we want to look at all of the packets associated with that IP address or that web server. And then we might want to go and look at, well, who else does it talk to? And we can get a lot of detail. So this is around this. Now that we've identified that there's a problem with that device, we might want to go and look in more detail. So another example I'll use is something like a worm. So I talked about Morris worm back in 1988. So we can map those worms out and how they've traveled across a customer's network. And once we've got that mapping, then this map that we've drawn becomes interactive. So we could look at any one of those devices and just right click on it and say, give me a look at from a vulnerability scan. So I might want to launch a Nessus vulnerability scan. I might want to go and do a SAN IP lookup and say, well, any of the IP addresses involved with that thing that got compromised. I want to see what are those IP addresses? Who's it been talking to? And then lastly, I might want to go and do something like a user report and say, okay, for any one of those devices that got infected by a worm, who were the users that were using that device? And lastly, we can start mapping out. You can see things like we can actually go down to the user and say, okay, so it's all about this threat hunting of getting the information first, using observability to help the humans make better decisions about what they should look at, what they shouldn't, and then this whole pivoting and drill down to try to figure out what's going on in the environment. So in summary, threat hunting can be complex, but the basics are simple. So I talked about whiteboarding. I talked about just being curious and trying to run theories and seeing if that's happening or not. We're trying to chase those things down that might be quietly sitting in our customers' environments. You need full fidelity telemetry. So what we mean by that is you need to capture all of this data and retain it. Not being able to capture all of this data and retain it means that it's like a security camera where you keep turning the security camera off and keep turning the security camera on. So it's kind of risky to do that because if the camera was off and someone snuck into the building, we've completely missed it. So we need to be able to watch everything. And unified observability is going to help. It's becoming so difficult with all of this telemetry, all of this data. If you think about the customer networks are getting busier, they're getting faster, they're hybrid, we have secure encrypted protocols going across the top. It gets very, very difficult to watch everything. We can't do that anymore. So the systems need to be able to understand, and using things like artificial intelligence, machine learning, figure out what's important, what isn't. When something happens here, it notices over there. We need those systems. So that's something that you're seeing we're putting a lot of time in. So thank you very much for your time. Thank you for staying with me. I know it's Friday afternoon. I'm very much looking forward to sticking around and spending some more time with you. So thank you very much.